World Financial Group offers entrepreneurs from all backgrounds the opportunity to start their own business on a level playing field. Dr. Yana Woodhouse, receiving the WCM Wall Street Pioneer Award by the United Black Wall Street of America, Inc., is one of those entrepreneurs.
I see WFG and TFA as a place where African Americans with an entrepreneurial mindset can flourish. And the bonus, we help families and serve the communities across the country.
To learn more about us, go to worldfinancialgroup.com.
We are the sons and daughters of the soul. We are resilient and forever forward-thinking. We ask for nothing else than the opportunity to live and to create the lives that we were meant to live. We want nothing but an equal chance at options and possibilities. The same possibilities and options to live out our potential as our fellow man. We want to be heard, understood, and expressive in our reality. We are the future. We are the creative. We are here.
This is Kia Rogers, and you're listening to Urbanology with my dad, Tony Rogers, on WHCR 90.3 FM New York.
Good afternoon. This is Tony Rogers, your host for Urbanology, The Art of War. And I always say this, not always, but a lot of the times I allow for people to understand the art of war comes from my birth name, which is William Anthony Rogers. And since I studied Sun Tzu, The Art of War, sometimes it's kind of a play on words. And many people wonder, who's William Anthony Rogers? Is that your dad? I said, no, that's my real name. Nevertheless, welcome to the Urbanology Show. I have a wonderful guest for this show, a person that I've known, almost over 40 years. He's been the jazz columnist for the Amsterdam News for about 20 years. He's a senior editor for the Forever Harlem book. That's the book that came out with the Chamber, I think, at one of our anniversaries. The Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce put out a book, Forever Harlem, which is still a popular book. And I think it's probably on Amazon still. Ron Scott, freelance writer, written for that New York Times, Vogue magazine, Daily News. He's talked just anyone in jazz. That's somebody Ron has in many cases talked with him. I get his Instagram stuff now where he's all over the place talking and interviewing these musicians. One of the major reasons we're talking with Ron is, as many you know, the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, well, actually the Harlem Tourism Board, not the Greater. I have a number of hats. Sometimes I get them mixed up. The Harlem Tourism Board has been working with the Senegal Tourism Agency and Air Senegal to create a Harlem-Dakar partnership, creating ways for African Caribbean Americans to travel. We've been there 3 times this year, and planning another trip in December, the 8th to the 15th. While we were there in March, I believe, this was when Soul City and a number of us went there, we had an opportunity to go to St. Louis to meet with the coordinators of the Senegalese Jazz Festival, which is not as popular for Americans as it is for French and some Europeans. So we met Barami Sack, who's the coordinator, and we talked about creating some activities that would allow for more African and Caribbean Americans to know about this jazz festival and go to Senegal based on what we were talking about. In a conversation with Ron Scott, he informed me about the relationship he had with the great pianist Randy Weston, and how he, along with Randy's wife, had been planning to do a major festival in Senegal. Matter of fact, the Senegal Jazz Festival in May 2023 is doing a salute, because they were going to do that in 2019, but the pandemic. So that's what we'll be talking about, some of Ron's work, his relationship with Randy, and some of the things that he's been doing for so many years with jazz and with Harlem Week and the Chamber and many other community-based organizations. So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Ron Scott. Ron, how are you doing, my brother?
Fine, Tony. How's everything going, man? Thanks so much for inviting me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure, brother. You've been doing things for a long time, and even without our Senegal conversations that we've been having, it would be good to have you on the show based on your history. You know, we've been together for a long time. You've written about most of the stuff, Harlem Week and all of that stuff. You know, between you and Peter Bailey was on the show once before. You were the two basic beginning writers of that history and the stuff that took place for the last 48 years. So
yeah, I learned a lot from Peter.
Yeah. But he has a new book out about Malcolm. I have to get him back.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I have to get him back on. I promised him that I would have him back on the show when that book came out. But nevertheless, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was your relationship with Randy Weston, who was considered America's African musical ambassador, you know, and he was all over Africa, and they loved him in Senegal. And actually, as I had mentioned before, they're doing a special dedication to Randy in their next upcoming festival in May. So give us a little information about that and some of the things that you've been doing with the Amsterdam News as relates to your writing and following the jazz scene in America.
Well, let me go back to when Randy was alive, because, well, you know, he died September 1st, 2018. So I guess that's 4 years ago now. Doesn't seem like that long ago, but when he was alive, you know, well, you know, his wife Fatou, she's from Senegal, so he was even before he met her, he was going there on a regular basis. But once he really started going there, and they started talking to the folks in Senegal, they had decided that they were going to do a festival, and the festival was going to be a tribute to Randy, but he was also going to play a great part in bringing in musicians aside from his band. He was going to be bringing in other American musicians, and we were going to do a whole thing. We were talking about having master classes with him, his band, and other musicians would actually go not only to the quote prestigious colleges, but more so to the communities, where the schools weren't actually being funded totally by the government. They were going to go there, play for the kids, and talk to the younger students, and maybe at some point they would turn around and do the whole college scene. And he was very excited about that. I was very excited, and they were even talking about naming the festival the Randy Weston Jazz Festival, So yeah, that was very exciting.
Well,
and now with the conversation that we had, hopefully, and what you just said, that they're planning on doing something, so that would be great in his honor and a tribute to him to have the festival.
and one of the things that I had mentioned to you, and part of some of the excitement, even with the St. Louis, the Senegalese Jazz Festival, because people probably don't. If I say St. Louis, that's not going to be as effective as what it. St. Louis is a location within Senegal.
Right.
Thanks to Soul City, there are possibilities, as I have mentioned to you before, is not only if we are able to, and you can help with that, and I'm sure Randy's wife can help with that, if we can get some top name jazz musicians, but musicians along, because Randy and many people have indicated, of course, jazz is the major focus, but the music, the African sound, is important. So even with Harlem Week, we changed it from the Jazz Festival to the Harlem Music Festival. But the idea is that if we can get some top artists, especially in honor of Randy, there's a possibility of having a pay-per-view for that day. I think it's one day that they set aside to pay tribute to American music during the festival. But the idea of having maybe a 10-day period where, as was planned before, there could be workshops, master classes at different locations, and so time could be spent in the car, and then going to St. Louis for the festival. There are a lot of interesting connections there, and that relationship. And for many, I don't know how many people are familiar with Randy Weston. Give a little background of his career and what he has done. I know the Spirit of Our Ancestors is I was familiar with because Dizzy was on it, and again the late Pharoah Sanders and a number of other artists was on it. But I know his background became really an ambassador of African music. So tell listeners a little bit about that and your experience with him.
Well, he had that whole relationship with the Ghanaians, and he started incorporating them in all of the festivals that he did. He actually brought them here to the United States and did some concerts with them, and he constantly performed with them in Africa. all of the albums that he recorded over the years, but his whole thing was always about the ancestors. I would go to his house and he would be playing Duke Ellington, Art Tatum, all these folks, and
Count Basie,
and he would talk about how great they were and how they inspired him, but
and the monk.
When I left his house, if I had known we were going to talk this much about Randy, I would have bought some of his books that I have behind me. He would, when I left his house, I used to say his house in Brooklyn was like a university, an African American university that dealt with the culture and the music. So he was always, that's why his band was called African Rhythms, because that's what it was always about with him. It was always about the ancestors. And like I said, anytime I was at his house, I left with a book and some type of DVD from when he performed, or the history going back to Timbuktu, and all of that. His all of his works now are at Harvard. So if you want to see his works, get all of his history, check out all the albums that he's done and everything. That's where it is.
I know African Rhythms, you can get that on Amazon. I remember looking at it, which was his autobiography. But as you mentioned, he was truly an ambassador and did a lot, which works again. Tell us a little bit about your history as the Jazz Notes, the 20-year column with the Amsterdam News. Tell us a little bit about some of your experiences as a columnist on jazz for the Amsterdam News.
Well, first I have to thank Eleanor Tatum. She's the one that hired me, and we were at the embassy, and she asked. I just happened to be standing next to her. It was like total.
All things happen for a reason, so
right, total accident. She looks at me, that
was your ancestors, brother. It wasn't an accident, but go ahead.
It may have helped because there was only three black people in the room. Her, myself, and a brother that wrote for Time Out magazine. So she asked me. She says, "Oh, do you write jazz?" And I was like, "Yeah." She says, "Oh, we're looking for a jazz writer." And she says, "Oh, call up the editor." And the editor at the time was Vanette Price. Vanette Price just had happened to be my editor for two other publications that I had written for. So it was like an immediate connection. And wow, it doesn't seem like 20 years. It's like I'm honored to write for the Amsterdam News, which is one of the oldest Black newspapers in America, probably along with the Chicago Defender. So it's been quite a ride. I mean, the Amsterdam News has taken me around the world. It's like Panama, Cuba, South Africa, Italy, the Detroit Jazz Festival, the Monterey Jazz Festival, jazz festivals in Miami, and having spoke. The other day I was just thinking about all of the musicians that I've interviewed and spoken to and had the pleasure of hanging out with over the years. I remember I met Dizzy Gillespie at Gracie Mansion. Actually, it was doing the JVC Jazz Festival. You remember when George Wing, they used to always have the receptions for the
before
JVC
they had the
Festival,
festival.
before they had the festival, and,
Right.
it was at Gracie Mansion. Clarence Atkins, one of my mentors, he used to write for the Amsterdam News. So the day that I'm walking in this summer afternoon going to Gracie Mansion, we get inside. Clarence is walking in front of me. At the time, he was writing for another publication. I was like, oh, damn, there's Clarence Atkins, because I had never met him. I was like, oh, man. So I run up, I introduce myself, and Clarence had this deep, gravelly voice. He's like, yeah, man, what's happening? How you doing? So I was telling him I was writing, and somebody out of from the side says, where the hell you think you going? And he looks at the cat and he says, oh, man. And he starts walking over there, and he says to me, he says, come on. And I look up, and it's Dizzy. I'm like, later on in there, I was like, I was blessed. How in one day I meet one of my main mentors at Rice Jazz, Clarence Atkins, and he introduces me to Dizzy. And Dizzy he says, yeah, this is another writer. And Dizzy looks at me and says, oh, man, I hate writers, especially you write jazz. And I said, sometimes. He was like, man, I do not like. He said, those guys always talking about the music. They don't know anything. He said, you play an instrument? I said, no. He said, so how the hell you write about jazz? I'm like, oh, man. And then Clarence says, man, he's just joking. And then he looks at Clarence, and they both bust out laughing. And then Dizzy like nudges me. Oh, man, I'm just joking with you. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. Because I remember I was in college. Right? It must have been a junior by then. And me and my boy, Dizzy was playing at Carnegie Hall. And we had the $5 seats. And
nosebleed seats, huh?
Right? And anybody watching now, it was like they actually had seats for $5 at Carnegie Hall. It's like, yeah, I think probably at that time to sit in the orchestra might have been, I guess, maybe $20, $25, as opposed to now it's like 100, 152. So yeah, so
who's there
sitting way back, man, but. We were shouting, screaming, So it's just kind of odd how because I went to school to be a social worker. I didn't go to school to be a jazz writer or a writer, period. So a lot of times when I read stuff, and I see. Like Greg Tate, all of the stuff that he did back in the 70s and 80s. I'm like, damn, where was I? And then I'm like, oh, you weren't writing, you were a social worker. So I'm like, man, I missed out on some stuff. But I missed out on some stuff, but I was into a lot of the music, and I met a lot of the musicians, Clark Terry, Frank Foster, the Heath brothers, so Miles, so
how did you tell us a little bit about Miles? Because Miles, depending on who you talk to or depending how he felt in the day, people had different versions.
Listen, this is brief. They introduced me to him. I said hi. He said whatever he said, and I moved on. And unfortunately, a lot of that had to do with what you just said about his reputation. I was so in awe of meeting him, and at the same time, the whole reputation of how he acts towards people, it freaked me out. So I really didn't say anything. And now when I think back, because all of the musicians I know that have worked with him, and including Quincy Troop, who wrote his autobiography, they all have positive things to say about it. You know, they
Well,
all
he was a
talk about,
Gemini, so he could be have different types of relationships.
right, and they all talk about, he liked to tell jokes and he was really funny, So I blew my one opportunity to like maybe have become closer or whatever.
Because
But
you was kind of nervous that he might go off on you or something.
right, so yeah, man. But I mean, just all of the doors, because like I said, Randy and Roy Haynes. Roy Haynes taught me just more about being a writer. I'll tell you this story. Roy was playing at the Blue Note, right? And everybody that knows Roy, he was like he still is a sharp dresser. He was always hooked up. So it was summertime. So I had on shorts and sneakers. So Roy looked, and we're in his dressing room, and Roy looks at me. He says, "Yo, Ron, come here, man." He said, "What are you doing wearing shorts? How could you come to see me in shorts and sneakers, man?" He said, "You're a jazz writer." He said, "More than that, you're a black writer, man. You gotta have more respect for the music, man. You can't be coming out in shorts, And after that, never wore shorts again, man.
Oh, you was sure.
Or sneakers.
On interviews, you mean?
No, I was just hanging out. I don't. I mean, if it's summertime and it's an outdoor concert, yeah, I'm gonna wear shorts or whatever. But if I'm going indoors, I'm gonna have on some slacks, a jacket.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go presentable.
You're gonna represent, right?
Right. I'm gonna represent. Because here's another thing that when I was doing publicity, right, doing PR, anytime you interviewed an R&B person like Luther Vandross or whoever, the OJs, you always went through a publicist. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was used to doing. But at one point, we used to do jazz shows. Remember the Hotel Diplomat?
Yeah.
We used to do jazz shows on Monday night at the Hotel Diplomat, right? Mm-hmm. Our main artist that always came was Sun Ra and his orchestra, right? But one Monday we had Roy Haynes. I was so excited, man. It's like Roy Haynes, oh man. So Roy comes, he performs after the show. We're kicking it. I was kicking it with Roy Haynes, right? So I said, "Yo, man, I have to interview you." He said, "Okay, cool. Call me." So I'm thinking record label, all of this. So I said, "Well, give me your publicist number, and we'll get in touch." It's like, my people get in touch with your people. So he looks at me, he's like, "Publicist, what are you talking about?" I'm like, don't you have a PR person? He said, "Nah, man, I'm a jazz musician. We don't have publicists, man. Yeah, I'll give you my number. Call me." I was like, whoa. So check it out, Tony. He gives me the number. I go home. I'm so excited about having the conversation, number one. Then on top of that, actually having the man's phone number. I call up one of my boys, man, and he's just like, "Yo, I just finished hanging out with Roy. I got his number." Honestly, I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up, I wrote down all of my notes and my questions and stuff. And I wake up at 7, go back to sleep, wake up at 9, go back to sleep, wake up at 10. Now I'm like up, I'm anxious, I'm walking around. I'm like, 10:30, I called him. Hey, Roy, this is Ron Scott. You told me to call you about the interview. He says, yo, Ron Scott, what time is it? I said, it's 10:30. He said, number one, you never call a jazz musician at 10:30 in the morning. Call me later. Click. So that was a good lesson. And that doesn't relate so much today, because musicians are doing a lot of musicians now, like Jimmy Owens and Ron Carter and all of them. They're still, they have positions at some of the colleges, New School, Juilliard.
Ron was at City College for a long period of time.
Right. Reggie's at the New School, Jimmy Owens at the New School, So now a lot of these cats get up early. Of course, if I see them out one night and I'm supposed to talk to them the next day, I know I'm not going to call them at 10:30. I'm going to call, and then again, remember, back in the day, you remember the Apollo had 6 shows a day. They open at 10 a.m. and the last show was at 10 p.m. Mm-hmm. Now there's only 2 shows.
Right.
Any jazz club throughout the United States, they're only doing 2 shows. Sometimes Smoke Uptown, they do, I think on Friday and Saturday, or Saturday, they do 3 shows. They do a show at 7, 9, and another show around 10 or 10:30.
Yeah, matter of fact, I'm going to bring Bill Saxon on at some point to do an interview.
Bill's place.
He's still Bill's place, They're still doing the speakeasy thing. I want to have him on the show. I just got to catch up with him, But,
right, because at one point on 133rd Street, where he has Bill's place, going back to the late 1920s. When Prohibition was still in effect, they had at least 30 clubs on that block, man. Oh, wow. On both sides of the street, from what is it, from Lenox to 7th?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Because his spot, Billie Holiday performed in there a few times.
Yeah, that's kind of like when tourists come, we talk to them about his spot, because that's one of the last speakeasies.
Right. That was the last show, because they had Tilly's Chicken House, before because she was on that block, and then she moved around the corner on to Lenox Avenue. Mm-hmm. But Duke Ellington used to hang in there a lot. Art Tatum, yeah.
And Ron, I just wrote a story. I hadn't just wrote it, but it was I revised it about the Chamber and Harlem and Percy. And as you know, at one time there was a campaign for New York, the Red Apple, and you remember that came from the spot on 135th Street and Malcolm X Boulevard, called the Red Apple, where the jazz musicians would come back to New York and say, hey, we're gonna meet you back at the Apple, because they was in Europe. And I don't remember his name, but he was a marketing public relations person, I believe, in the Dinkins administration. And they were actually it was Sutton. He was with Percy, because that was before Dinkins. And they were going to try to find a way to bring tourists back to New York and to promote tourism in New York. And the guy, Gillette, I believe his name was. Anyway, he was a jazz guy, and he remembered this story about the Apple, and then he created this thing, Welcome to the Big Apple. And to this day, New York has that Apple
Right, because
relationship.
they used to sell, they don't do it anymore, but they used to sell the buttons like
Yeah,
down
on the
40.
pins. I
Right,
remember,
the butt with the red apple on there
right,
said,
right,
said
right.
New
I remember
York.
when we
Yeah.
used to have events at Gracie Mansion. That was we had to have our Apple pin. That was. But so there's a lot of history. The Tree of Life was on 7th Avenue.
Right, that's right, man. You had to rub that. You had to
Yeah,
rub
so
that
the
every time
artists
you
would
talk
go
to
and
them up.
touch the Tree of Life on 7th Avenue, and then when they had to cut it down, they
And they,
still at the Apollo
right,
now.
they
But,
brought the stump to the Apollo. Yeah.
right, but that was one of the famous markings. 7th Avenue was jumping at one time.
So, yeah, but listen, here's what Roy Haynes told me about Harlem. He said back in the day, musicians used to say they'd rather go to Harlem than to go to heaven. he said that's how hard Harlem was jumping back then, man.
Yeah, man, it was a lot of stuff going on. The Renaissance, the Rennies. I remember my parents used to tell me that they would be doing dancing. They would wear their sneakers
Oh
because they
yeah,
were doing
right,
the
right.
Lindy and
The
all that stuff.
Savoy, to the
Yeah,
Savoy, right.
yeah, at the Savoy. And but even coming up, there was still Small's Paradise
And then
and
we had Wells, and then you had
Wells.
Count Basie's.
Right, right. Matter of fact, Matt McCoy, who's the CEO of Soul City, uh, did a lot of work in helping the Wells franchise. He was the manager there for a long period of time.
Oh wow.
He did a lot for Miss Wells, which is a lot of history. I'm pretty sure I know from meetings with Lloyd in the Chamber, they're putting together a major book for the 125th anniversary.
Oh yeah, I'm working on that.
I know that you would be that because you did the one before and developing articles and stuff. Interesting. I just sent Lloyd a note. It's going to be in February, and I
Right.
had a dream actually last night when Hope R. Stevens took Lloyd and I uh, uh, on a trip. I think it was to Neva's, and that was before. That was when we were planning the first Harlem Day, and he was giving. We were on the beach. He was telling us about his visions. And I dreamt about that last night. I'm not sure what the meaning is, but I know that there's supposed to be a major event in February celebrating the
Yeah,
125th.
right.
I
Yeah, it's
guess
gonna
that was him
be
saying, "Don't forget about me. Remember, I was the one that brought you two cubs into the chamber." That was probably about around 1973, because the first day of Harlem Day was in '74. So
yeah, it's gonna be a big major event, man.
yeah, 125 years. That's a long time to be continued. I think that's one, if not the oldest civic organization, business organization that has continued in Harlem, because the chamber, as you know, you wrote about it,
Right,
the George Washington Bridge. They named the George Washington
right.
Bridge, and
The subway,
the subways and all of those things. They were the ones that at that time wasn't none of us there.
right.
Matter of fact, during the first Harlem Renaissance, and people started looking at Harlem with being black, they changed their name from the Harlem Board of Commerce to the Uptown Chamber of Commerce. And
Right.
then when finally Hope R. Stevens was elected, he brought Lloyd in, and at that time I was going to be a lawyer, so I was in his office. I was clerking in his office, and so he made Lloyd the first black vice president, and I had no choice. I was clerking, so he said, "Okay, you the director. We need a director. You need, you do that." So I was the first black director of then the Uptown Chamber of Commerce, and when he died, Lloyd Dickens took over.
Yeah, Lloyd Dickens, right.
And when Lloyd Dickens took over, Percy was always the orchestrator. Percy had Lloyd to become the president. And at that time, I became the vice president. So that's some of that history, but it goes back 125 years. So it's a lot of history there.
Yeah, because the Mr. Anderson founded the Amsterdam News in like 1909.
Mm-hmm.
When he was living on 65th Street in Amsterdam.
Right.
I think the first one, he was putting out these what do you call them? Was it mimeograph? Like back then, I guess.
Right,
pages. The paper cost 3 cents.
Right. And you put the letters on it, and then you roll it around in the paper. And
right.
The paper come out,
right.
Yeah.
And he was charging 3 cents for that. So and then he came up to Harlem.
And I think at one time Percy had ownership interest in the
yeah, he did. And then the Procopes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Mr. Tatum. Yeah.
Yeah. And then his daughter took over the reign.
Right.
But there's a lot of history, and jazz has always been that part of Harlem. That even though St. Louis level places, but jazz, Harlem just seemed to be that place. Matter of fact, we just talked. Pharoah Sanders passed recently. Did you ever talk with him or interview him?
No, I didn't. And I'm still kicking myself because my friend had given me his phone number. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, I'm going to call him. And then as soon as I heard he passed, I was like, damn.
When, as you remember Blafrica Promotions, that was with Lloyd, Marvin Kelly, and that's how I got into, was through Blafrica Promotion. That's how I met Lloyd. We used to do these concerts at colleges with Pharoah Sanders and a number of Earth, Wind, and Fire, and we would take these groups to have lectures at the colleges and had concerts at the colleges. So that's how I met Pharoah Sanders. And I don't know whether you remember, there was an organization called the Harlem 42, and that was where all of the gangs came together. Well, the Youth Services Agency paid money to organize the gangs. It wasn't a lot in Harlem, but on the west side and the east side. And we got all of the leaders, and we made it 42, and they were like a little government. And Al Sharpton was part of it. A lot of people when he was young. And when we had the actual election, I forgot exactly where it was. It might have been in the Armory. I forgot. But I know Pharoah Sanders and Sun Ra were the musicians. It was wild, man.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Sun Ra alone, man. Then with Pharoah, that could have been, but Pharaoh's music was very spiritual.
Yeah. So Sun Ra also.
Right. Because they always try to put it in an avant-garde thing. Right. And it's much deeper than avant-garde. Because at the end of the day, we started avant-garde and bebop. So and all of our music is rooted in Africa. It's rooted in the cotton fields, the chain gangs, the black church, so the juke joints, so it's all going to have some type of spiritualism involved in it, so to say, oh, well, that's avant-garde, and that's straight ahead and that's bebop, all it does is divide our music.
Well, that's if you go to the Jazz Museum in Harlem, they have this quote by Duke Ellington, who was saying, "Don't jazz is fine, but don't box me into black music. Everything has a root. It is really African music. When they talk about spirituals, the blues, all of that stuff." You can follow the roots in Africa, and that's why when we were working with the Harlem Jazz Festival around the Harlem Week thing, it changed to the Harlem Music Festival, because the idea was that no boxes in, because all of this stuff crosses over. There's certain foundations in it that no matter how you look at it, it crosses over. So I really tell us a little bit about your relationship as far as Harlem Week. What are some of your fun memories there?
Harlem Week. I remember Lois Alexander and the fashion shows. I remember when Richard Pryor came to Harlem Week. Well,
yeah, I remember that too.
Listen, this sums it all up. I remember Harlem Week as you do, when it was on 125th Street, from Lenox to 7th, and it didn't end until 2 or 2:30 in the morning. and we had to get up. We had to get up and
do the next one
at 8 o'clock the next morning to do it all over again.
But if you remember, when we were talking about Blafrica, we would take a trip. We would go on a trip, then we would come back from the trip and have a boat ride at the Circle Line, and then we would come on Saturday for a Harlem Week that would last until 2 o'clock, and then get up the next morning and do it all over again.
Right. Yeah, so, that was crazy. I mean, we had, I can't even think of half. We had some of the top musicians of that time on that stage.
On
I mean, everybody came through there.
Everybody who was somebody, and the whole thought was we had such a large crowd. A lot of
there was thousands of people out, literally thousands of people out there, man. And like I said, at 2 a.m., they didn't leave until we started turning the stage lights off. And then they were like, okay, it must be over.
I remember when Richard Pryor came, he came through the back, and I went
right.
on stage, and he looked out there, and he turned to me, he says, "Is that door behind me still open? Because I ain't seen this many." And you know what he said? Right. In my life, if I'm not funny, they ain't gonna chase me out of here.
Right.
That door's open. But it was amazing, man. You could actually walk on the stage and walk on his all the way to 8th Avenue, because it was the first major thing that took place at the Harlem State Office Building.
That's right.
And then we expanded. Especially when Mugabe came, that was when that's when we became international. When he came and speak, you remember that?
Yeah.
And that's when the world started looking at that. But it's been some time, Ron Scott. What are you looking to do in 2023? What's in your bucket list?
Books. Got to write a book.
Yeah,
I've been working on it. I have all of the parts together. It's just a matter of putting it together, writing the outline, and submitting it to a publisher or agent, or either self-publishing.
You should call Peter. He's pretty good at that.
His last book, he's self-published. The one on Malcolm, he's self-published,
which is out now. Matter of fact, when he was on the show, he was saying that this last book, he kind of chronologizes why he believed Malcolm was assassinated based on his relationship with bringing African people together, which again, this is what we're talking about with the Harlem Tourism Board, this African Harlem initiative. Marcus Garvey there's a new piece out on a new series out with Marcus Garvey, which is great. He's the one that first started, articulating the fact that we're African,
Right.
And he created the flag,
the Black Star.
Yeah, and had and the film, they showed it during Harlem Week, and one of the things that it actually showed was that his ships would have a lot of mechanical problems, and what they're saying now is that they believe that the FBI had infiltrated and was sabotaging his ships because he was taking ships to Africa and bringing produce back for people. So it's an interesting story. But even with Malcolm, it seems like every time we start to look at bringing African and Caribbean Americans or the diaspora back to Africa, if you are successful, you start to, disappear.
Right. That's why they deported Garvey.
Yeah, exactly. And matter of fact, there's a movement now which was part of the talk. Congressman Rangel and Lynn Jeffries are in the movie, and they were there to get a pardon for him because now they are beginning to have the research to show that the charges were trumped up. That again, some of the infiltrators, created these types of issues that allow for a lot of this to happen. But again, the whole idea is that there's always been a concern about African and Caribbean or the diaspora waking up and understanding that we're African. And I kind of think that I was watching Rachel Maddow's, I believe, the show last night when she was talking about that the new chancellor of Italy is from the Mussolini party.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's a movement, even in Sweden, the far right has taken over, the policy. So Europe is becoming more fascist, and they're going to turn at this point. If that doesn't stop, Africa is the last resort.
That's right.
So we're going to have to make some decisions. Are we going to stand by and let them take over Africa? And if they do, what about us here? So there's some
if they take over Africa, what happens to us? look at what they're trying to do to us now. Come on.
So,
at least Africa's a continent. There's a lot to conquer before you get everybody. But here, they could string all of us up, man, within a matter of weeks. I know a lot of brothers and sisters that are prepared. So. It's not going to go down the way it went down before. That's for sure.
I'm sure, but you got to remember when America was at war with Japan, they put Japanese in concentration camp. Yeah. Even though the Germans could get around a lot easier than the Japanese, they could infiltrate a lot easier. But so if there's a war with continents of Africa. And we're here. Obviously, they're going to think we're spies, whatever. Can't trust us. But that's far-reaching, but something that we need to think about. One of the great things, though, again, going back to the Jazz Festival, because some of the people in Ghana have reached out to the tourism board to develop a Taste of Africa music festival. I have to talk to you a little bit about that, because what they're saying is the same thing that Randy was saying, a lot of other people. Music is a way to bring the diaspora back together, because that is a connection of the spiritual relationship, because the music, the sound, that you don't, there's no words that can describe how you feel when you hear, whether it's Pharoah Sanders or James Brown.
Right.
There's still something that
you got that beat, man.
You got that beat. But Ron, thank you again for taking time to be on the show. Look forward to having more conversations. At some point, as we get closer to the Jazz Festival, as it relates to writing in the paper, having Fatu Weston maybe on, along with some of the coordinators. That's what I was trying to do this week,
right.
to get the coordinators from the Jazz Festival. Since Randy Weston will be honored at the festival, that's a good way to begin to look at developing an initiative on behalf of Randy, because there's still a lot of young and old musicians who still have a great deal of admiration for what Randy was trying to do. And we might be able to get a lot of traction on creating a Randy Weston day.
I know we definitely can do that, because I mean, so many people loved and respected Randy, and as we're talking about Africa, his whole thing was remember the ancestors and know your history,
right?
And those two go together. You can't have history without the ancestors, and you can't have the ancestors without history. So,
well, I think that's a good way for us to part, Ron. I appreciate your time. We'll be back in contact, and thank you for all that you've done. If you want to check Ron, he writes every week the Jazz Notes in the Amsterdam News. Check him out. He's been doing that for 20 years, and Ron is with jazz, with my other brother Lloyd Strahan is with numbers. If you want to know something about jazz, you go.
You're too kind. You're too kind.
Take care, brother.
Okay, be cool, Tony. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Surely, and that ends our show today. For those who may be aware, the Harlem Tourism Board will be having their first meeting for the fall tomorrow, Wednesday, September the 28th. You can either contact Soul City or send an email to me at the Harlem Tourism Board at gmail.com, and we'll send you a link if you're interested. We will be talking about Senegal, the trip in December, and also with Lewiston Murray, who is the new general manager of the Harlem Renaissance Marriott Hotel. He'll give an update on the status of the opening and what's going to happen there. I'd like to thank Soul City for helping us do this and giving us a platform to allow for listeners to learn a little bit more about what's going on in urban America. Thank you. Tony Rogers signing off. Hope to see you next week.
This is Kia Rogers, and you're listening to Urbanology with my dad, Tony Rogers, on WHCR 90.3 FM New York.